जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरवरधारी यशोदनंदन ब्रज जन रंजना यशोदनंदन ब्रज जन रंजना यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिविराजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तरशत श्री श्रीमती दिव्यांग्रेसी श्री भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिविराजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तरशत श्री श्रीमद् भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज की अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की नामाचार्य हरिदास ठाकुर की प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासवती गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की वृंदावन मथुरा धाम की नवद्वीप मायापुर धाम की जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की गंगामय यमुनामय की भक्ति देवी तुलसी महारानी की समवेत भक्त वृंद की गौर प्रेमानंदे all glories to the simple devotees, all glories to the simple devotees, all glories to the simple devotees, all glories to Jai Guru Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत् नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिके. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 25, The Glories of Devotional Service, verse number 13. śrī-bhagavān uvāca yoga ādhyātmikaḥ puṁsāṁ mato niḥśreyasāya me atyantoparatir yatra duḥkhasya ca sukhasya ca. śrī-bhagavān uvāca yoga ādhyātmikaḥ puṁsāṁ mato niḥśreyasāya me atyantoparatir yatra duḥkhasya ca sukhasya ca. śrī-bhagavān uvāca yoga ādhyātmikaḥ puṁsāṁ mato niḥśreyasāya me atyantoparatir yatra duḥkhasya ca sukhasya ca. niḥśreyasāya atyantoparatir yatra duḥkhasya ca sukhasya ca. Bhagavan uvāca yoga ādhyātmikaḥ puṁsāṁ mato niḥśreyasāya duḥkhasya ca sukhasya ca. Matajis. Bhagavan uvāca yoga ādhyātmikaḥ puṁsāṁ mato niḥśreyasāya atyantoparatir yatra duḥkhasya ca sukhasya ca. śrī-bhagavān uvāca yoga ādhyātmikaḥ puṁsāṁ mato niḥśreyasāya atyantoparatir yatra duḥkhasya ca sukhasya ca. śrī-bhagavān uvāca yoga ādhyātmikaḥ puṁsāṁ mato niḥśreyasāya atyantoparatir yatra duḥkhasya ca sukhasya ca. Śrī-bhagavān uvāca the Personality of Godhead said, yogaḥ, the yoga system, ādhyātmikaḥ, relating to the soul, puṁsāṁ, of living entities, mataḥ, is approved, niḥśreyasāya, for the ultimate benefit, by me, atyanta, complete, uparatiḥ, detachment, yatra, where, duḥkhasya, from distress, ca, and, sukhasya, from happiness, ca, and. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Bhagavad-gītā. Translation: the Personality of Godhead answered, the yoga system which relates to the Lord and the living and the individual soul, which is meant for the ultimate benefit of the living entity and which causes detachment from all happiness and distress in the material world, is the highest yoga system. Purport: in the material world, everyone is trying to get some material happiness. But as soon as we get some material happiness, there is also material distress. In the material world, one cannot have unadulterated happiness. Any kind of happiness one has is contaminated by distress also. For example, if we want to drink milk, then we have to bother to maintain a cow and keep her fit to supply milk. Drinking milk is very nice. It is also pleasure. But for the sake of drinking milk, one has to accept so much trouble. The yoga system, as here stated by the Lord, is meant to end all material happiness and material distress. The best yoga system, as taught in Bhagavad-gītā by Kṛṣṇa, is bhakti-yoga. It is also mentioned in the Gita that one should try to be tolerant and not be disturbed by material happiness or distress. Of course, one may say that he is not disturbed by material happiness, but he does not know that just after one enjoys so-called material happiness, material distress will follow. This is a law of the material world. Lord Kapila states that the yoga system is the science of the spirit. one practices yoga in order to attain perfection on the spiritual platform. There is no question of material happiness or distress. It is transcendental. Lord Kapila will eventually explain how it is transcendental, but the preliminary introduction is given here. The sense of purport. Om ajnanatimirandasya jnananjanashalakaya chakshur ulmiritam ena tasmai Shri Gurave namaha Shri Chaitanya manobishtam sthapitam yena bhutale swayam rupa kadamayam dadati swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpata Rubhyascha Krupa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So welcome everyone for today's Srimad Bhagavatam class. So we are in chapter number 25, the glories of devotional service, and verse number 13. So this verse number 13 is the first verse which is spoken by Lord Kapila in response to the questions asked by Mother Devahuti. So actually this is the starting of the teachings of Lord Kapila. This is the first sloka he talks. I mean, previous slokas, it's essentially like, Mother Devahuti is asking questions to Lord Kapila, and before that it was, describing how Kardama Muni left for the forest. But the actual teaching of Kapila starts from this verse number 13. So it is said here, the personality of Godhead answered, the yoga system which relates to the Lord and the individual soul, which is meant for the ultimate benefit of the living entity, and which causes detachment from all happiness and distress in the material world, is the highest yoga system. So this is the first verse, as I mentioned, and typically, the first verse or the last verse of any topic tend to be very important. The reason is because they kind of tend to summarize, what's going to come, or it's going to summarize what already happened. And in the purport also, Prabhupada explains here that in the last line, this is actually a preliminary introduction is given here. He's going to elaborate first, but at least this is just the beginning. The first verse, Lord Kapila speaks. So the problem, again, because this is a response, right? This is a response by Lord Kapila to the questions asked by Mother Devahuti. And the first question asked by Mother Devahuti in this chapter is verse number 7. Of course, she asks a series of questions, but the first question she asks is that, Nirvinna niratam bhuman asad indriya darshanat, where she says that I am disgusted by the constant agitation of the impermanent senses. So this is, spoken by Mother Devahuti. And in response, Lord Kapila begins by this, the first verse, where he recommends this yoga process as a solution, right? And he says that the benefit of practicing such yoga process is that it bestows the ultimate benefit, the highest benefit. And how does it do so? It does by detachment from the material world. Because we all have problems, some problem or the other problem we all have, some material problem. And typically we can actually give so many solutions, right? Like, there are so many experts who can advise, or he can give some solutions to a problem. But however, those solutions are temporary or limited. But however, if one wants to, it's like almost like controlling a disease. I mean, if we really want to eliminate the disease and get the highest benefit, then there is no material solution. It's only a spiritual solution. That is why the highest, in order to bestow the highest ultimate benefit, the solution is that one has to detach. There is no question of attachment and then still finding a solution. If one wants to have an ultimate solution, well, then one has to become detached from the material world, right? So again, this is, I mean, we also see this is actually the election season in US, right? So you'll see a lot of politicians, they come and they make promises. They make promises to remove the problems, right? Of course, this is going on for last many, many years. Every time the president comes and tries to offer the solutions to remove the problems, but the problems remain. Or it's the same problem or a different kind of a problem, but the problem never really goes, right? So that is because they do not know what is the root cause of suffering. Unless you do not know the root cause of suffering, right, then you cannot offer a solution which will actually offer the ultimate, or which will remove the disease altogether. All you can do is just maintain the disease. And here it is mentioned, the yoga system is ādhyātmikaḥ. I mean, this is a word in the shloka. Ādhyātmikaḥ means which relates to the Lord and the individual soul. I mean, if you actually look at each and every word in this shloka, if you see, the first is yogaḥ, the yoga system. Ādhyātmikaḥ, relating to the soul. Puṁsāṁ, of living entities. Mataḥ is approved. I mean, if you actually literally just rearrange the words here according to this word-to-word meaning, it simply translates to, I approve of the yoga system related to the soul. I mean, this is what literally it really means. But if you see the way Prabhupada translates, is that the yoga system which relates to the Lord and in the individual soul is the highest yoga system. But actually, if you look back at the verse, I mean, it is nowhere it is mentioned the word the Lord, actually. I mean, you don't see the word of Bhagavan or Ishvara. It simply says ādhyātmikaḥ, means related to the soul. But in the translation, Prabhupada at this verse says that to the Lord and the individual, the yoga system which relates to the Lord and the individual soul, to kind of give a better understanding or a better clarity on what is being referred here to the yoga system, right? Because whenever we say any yoga, the word yoga is very general, right? It could either mean to it could either refer to karma yoga, or it could refer to jnana yoga, or it could either refer to bhakti yoga. It could refer to any of these things. So now here when he used the word yogaḥ, ādhyātmikaḥ, related to the Lord and the individual soul, so what exactly is it referring to? Which yoga system it is being referred to here, right? That's the question. So if you look at the purport, in the purport, Prabhupada mentions here, the best yoga system as taught in Bhagavad-gītā by Kṛṣṇa is bhakti-yoga. And further, he continues saying that it is also mentioned in the Gita that one should try to be tolerant and not to be disturbed by material happiness or distress. Of course, Prabhupada didn't exactly mention which shloka is referring to in Bhagavad-gītā, but of course, there are many verses in Bhagavad-gītā which talks about tolerance and not to become disturbed by happiness or distress. So if you look at all the verses in the Bhagavad-gītā, or at least the prime verses which talks about the tolerance and detachment, right? There are many verses. We can see like the famous verse of Matra Sparshastu Kaunteya, or Traigunya Vishaya Veda, where it basically says that, one should be tolerant of all this, temporary happiness and distress, or it's like more like a seasons, like changing seasons. It is never permanent, so not to become so disturbed by all these things. And also in the 13th chapter, where 13th chapter is more of actually of Sankhya, or it's more like a Jnana Yoga system. Over there also, we can see a heavy emphasis which is given on the tolerance and detachment. So oftentimes when we see these topics of tolerance or detachment discussed in Bhagavad-gītā, we generally tend to see them either in the chapters describing karma or jnana. But when we read the chapters, especially focusing on bhakti yoga, the primary focus is actually on meditating or focusing the mind on the Lord, or on the principles of devotional service, or the principles of surrender, right? Those are the main emphasis, main points we will see. In the chapter 12 also, if you see the devotional service, the main focus is actually on focusing mind on Kṛṣṇa, right? Of course, there's not too much discussion on tolerance and detachment. Of course, there are a couple of verses at the end of chapter 12, but the primary focus is actually on meditating one's mind on the Lord. So now the question here is that the use of the word ādhyātmikaḥ means what type of yoga system is being referred here. If you look at some of the previous translations of our acharyas, if you look at the Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur translation for the same verse, he says that ādhyātmikaḥ means it actually refers to jivatma, or the individual living entity, or the individual soul. And he says that, he translates that, I approve of the yoga system concerning the Atma for giving one's personal benefit. But if at the same translation, if you look Jiva Goswami's translation, he translates the word ādhyātmikaḥ as Paramatma. He does not say Atma, he says Paramatma. And he says that ādhyātmikaḥ means yoga fixed on Paramatma. So his translation goes as, I approve of the yoga concerning Paramatma for giving one's personal benefit. And if you see the way Prabhupada translates, he says that ādhyātmikaḥ, of course, in word-to-word meaning, he just simply says that related to the soul. But when it comes to the translation, he says that the yoga system which relates to the Lord and the living, and the individual soul. I mean, he kind of like combines both the views. Of course, someone may be thinking, I mean, why do we need to worry so much about all these technicalities? Like, I mean, soul, super soul, I mean, or both together, like what difference does it make? But actually, it does make a difference, The reason is because generally when people talk about Paramatma, or Bhagavan, they kind of interchangeably use these words. I mean, right? Atma, Bhagavan, Paramatma, they kind of interchange. I mean, sometimes they kind of mix together. But actually, technically speaking, the Bhagavan and Paramatma, they both are different, and they both have a specific functionalities which are unique to that aspect. So when we want to get into the finer details of the explanations, we need to be very particular of what word we are using. Are we using Bhagavan or are we using Paramatma? Both can make a significant difference. And of course, Acharya has their own reasons why they use a specific word, right? So now, I mean, this concept of Paramatma is, to be honest or to be frank, is not something which is very solidly understood or solidly explained. And even if you look at many other religions also, there's no really concept of Paramatma. I mean, even if you look at Islam or Christianity, they have a concept of God, they have a concept of devil, they have a concept of human being, they have a concept of nature, but you don't really see a concept of Paramatma. The concept of Paramatma is very unique, and you only find that concept in the Sanatana Dharma. So I mean, until Jiva Goswami has written his Paramatma Sandarbha, there has been no real clarity on the concept of Paramatma. And there was a lot of misunderstandings of imperfections in this understanding of the concept of Paramatma. And just to kind of give you a brief summary of the main highlight of the difference between the Bhagavan feature and the Paramatma feature is that, as we all know, the Lord actually manifests in three forms, right? You have Bhagavan, Paramatma, and Brahman, right? And at the same time, we also have, the Lord has three potencies. You have Bahiranga Shakti, Tatastha Shakti, and Antaranga Shakti, right? So three potencies and three forms of the Lord, three manifestations of the Lord. In the Jiva Goswami explains that this Bhagavan feature is essentially transcendental. The supreme transcendence is primarily dealing only with the Antaranga Shakti. But whereas the Tatastha Shakti, the individual living entities, and the Bahiranga Shakti, which is the material nature, is primarily created and overseen by the Paramatma feature, right? This Paramatma is qualified by these two potencies of Tatastha Shakti and Bahiranga Shakti. And this Paramatma actually further manifests in three Vishnus, right? You have Mahavishnu, and you have Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, and then you have Kshirodakshaya Vishnu. So this Vishnu form is actually the one who is creating and maintaining this Tatastha Shakti and Bahiranga Shakti. So when we talk about Paramatma, it essentially is when we are dealing with the primarily of Tatastha Shakti and Bahiranga Shakti, and the Antaranga Shakti is primarily under the purview of the Bhagavan feature. So, and this proper understanding of Paramatma feature can actually answer many of the puzzling questions put forward or arguments put forward by atheists. Like for example, the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle, or even the Buddhist philosophy, or even atheistic Sankhya, they all tend to have like one common, argument against, towards atheism. And if you see, interestingly, Aristotle or Buddhist or atheistic Sankhya, none of them really deny Bhagavan. They say that God is there, but their understanding of God is so horrible that they would rather just believe there's no God, right? So if you understand, if you see the way Aristotle describes the God, of course, it's very complicated, but I'm just trying to simplify. If you can further Google Aristotle's understandings of God, it is so horrible that he says that the God is eternal, and it is basically a non-moving object, right? And if the God is transcendental, he cannot actually be aware or be affected by material creation. You see that thing? So God is there, but at the same time he's not there. He's not really involved because God is transcendental, right? So this is actually a very dangerous understanding, because this kind of understanding leads to immorality. Like then you no longer have any concept of sin, right? You do whatever you want to do, and the God is there, but he's transcendental. He's not really cared about. He doesn't know what exactly is happening. So this is actually a very dangerous, way of interpreting God, and this is where Vyasadeva has refuted these arguments in his Vedanta, in his Brahma Sutras, right? So, and of course, there are many refutations, and one of the refutations is that, see, even though the material nature, the pradhana is there, but the pradhana is dead matter. It cannot act by itself. So there has to be an involvement of God throughout its manifestations, because pradhana does not have intelligence. So that means that God is there, but the God's involvement is also there. But that involvement of God is primarily of the Paramatma feature. It is not of the Bhagavan feature. Yes, God is transcendental, that is Bhagavan. But at the same time, God is also involved in each and every step of the creation in the form of Paramatma. So this is where a solid understanding of Paramatma can actually answer many of the tough arguments which is put forward by the atheists and the Buddhists or the Greek philosophers. And to further dwell into the proper understanding of Paramatma and Jivatma, right? Of course, there are some similarities, but at the same time there are also differences. And this ontology of Paramatma and Jivatma is actually very clearly explained by Jiva Goswami in Paramatma Sandarbha. For example, as far as understanding of Paramatma is concerned, primarily, of course, there are many detailed explanations, but just to kind of summarize, it's mainly the Paramatma is a supreme witness, Kshetrajna. Of course, sometimes even Jivatma is also referred as Kshetrajna, but of course, but the capacity or the level to which the Jivatma is a Kshetrajna versus Paramatma is a Kshetrajna is a vast difference. Because a living entity is only aware of his body, but the Paramatma is aware of all the bodies. So in this way, even though both are referred as Kshetrajna, but Paramatma is referred as a supreme witness. And also, he is the animator of Pradhana, Purusha, right? Because at the beginning of creation, we see Pradhana is there. But the Pradhana itself does not have the capacity to unfold the creation. There has to be Paramatma who kind of disturbs this, the balance of three modes of nature for the creation to happen. So that is also one of the, the role of Paramatma. And of course, once the creation happens, he also actively regulates the living entities and also actively, regulates the three modes of nature. And on the other hand, Jivatma, see, the living entity is not really an absolutely independent thing. No, it is actually defined as an integral part of Paramatma, right? Mame vamsha jiva loke. So it is actually a part of Kṛṣṇa. So because it is an integral part of Paramatma, there are some similarities and there are some differences. So, and we see that in the further verses, which is coming up in the next chapter and towards the end of 3rd canto, how Mother Devahuti, by meditating on Paramatma, has achieved perfection. For example, this is 25th chapter, and towards the 26th chapter end, there is a description of how, about how Mother Devahuti is practicing or applying the knowledge which is given by Kardama Muni, Lord Kapila, right? So just kind of summarize, you can see here, when a man is sleeping, all his material assets, namely the vital energy, the senses for recording knowledge, and the senses for working, the mind and the intelligence cannot arouse him. He can be aroused only when the super soul helps him. So here you can see the role of super soul in the path of self-realization and in enlightenment, right? Therefore, through devotion, detachment, and advancement in spiritual knowledge, acquired through concentrated devotional service, one should contemplate that super soul as present in this very body, although simultaneously apart from it. So you can see the role of super soul here. You see the word super soul, the Paramatma, is very specific. I mean, you cannot replace super soul with Bhagavan here because it has a specific functionality and a specific, purpose for using this word super soul here. And that is why the previous acharyas were trying to also not just translating ādhyātmikaḥ as soul, but also trying to saying soul and the super soul, both. Because both are related. It is just like mother and child. I mean, you cannot talk about child's creation without talking about mother, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? So both child and mother, because both are an integral part or inseparable in understanding the creation and in practice of devotional service. And in further, towards the end of third canto, the very last chapter, it shows the perfection of Devahuti, and where it said that she did so with serious engagement in devotional service. Because she was strong in renunciation, she accepted only the necessities of the body. She became situated in the knowledge due to realization of absolute truth. Her heart became purified. She became fully absorbed in meditation on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and all the misgivings due to the modes of material nature disappeared. Her mind became completely engaged in Supreme Lord. She automatically realized the knowledge of impersonal Brahman. As Brahman realized soul, she was freed from the designations of materialistic conception of life. Thus, all material pangs disappeared, and she attained the transcendental bliss. So here we can see how Mother Devahuti, after being instructed by Lord Kapila, has practiced this yoga system by concentrating her mind on the Paramatma, and she has achieved this perfection, right? And in the purport, actually, Prabhupada mentions that this perfection of Brahman realization or mystic yoga or devotional service is the perfection, following the instructions of her son in the matter of devotional service, she contemplated on the form of Lord within herself with great devotional love. So now, coming back to our discussion on the oneness and difference of Paramatma and Jivatma. See, even though Kṛṣṇa says that Mamevamsha Jivaloke, like, you are part and parcel, but however, that does not mean that there is 100% similarity and there is no difference. No. That is why this is where the Advaitavadis kind of differs. In Advaitavadis, the radical non-dualists, they completely equate Atma with Brahman. And they say that there is no difference. After liberation, you are no different than Brahman, and then you merge in Brahman. But however, in the Bheda Bheda Tattva, we say that no, there is oneness, but at the same time, there is also a difference. But, but the problem here is that then why is it that in scriptures, sometimes kind of focus on oneness and sometimes on difference, right? Like, when we say, Aham Brahmasmi, it kind of focuses exclusive oneness. And there are some statements which focus exclusively on difference, right? Even if you look at Bhagavatam also, there are many verses when talking about, the Jivatma and Paramatma, it tends to kind of focus more on the oneness or on the similarities. Especially those sections of Bhagavatam where it is more of, jnana dominated or karma dominated sections, like chapter, canto 11, or some chapters of canto 3, and some chapters in canto 2, which are kind of predominantly jnana dominated. There, whenever there's an explanation of super soul and soul, they kind of tend to focus on similarities. For example, here you can see in the, this is actually in the pastimes of King Puranjana, where the Lord speaks to King Puranjana. It is said, the focus here is that, my dear friend, you are qualitatively non-different from me in your constitutional position. You see that here the focus is more on the similarities. And the same way, in the 11th canto also, we can see there, according to knowledge in material modes of goodness, there is no qualitative difference between the living entity and supreme controller. Again, the focus here is on oneness. But of course, at the same time, there are many other shlokas which kind of focus or highlight more on the difference. For example, in the same 3rd canto we are reading, in the 9th chapter, we see a verse like this, of Lord Brahma, where the Lord speaks to Brahma, where he says that when you are freed from the conception of gross and subtle bodies, and your senses are freed from the influence of mode of material nature, you will realize your pure form in my association. You see that in my association. So here the focus is more on the difference. It's not more on the oneness. So the reason why the scriptures sometimes focus more on the oneness, why sometimes more focus on the difference, that is explained by Jiva Goswami in Paramatma Sandarbha in Anucheda number 37, where he says that tatra jnanechun prati sahasram abedam upadishtati bhaktichun prati de bedam eva kvachit. Means scriptures instruct non-difference to those who desire jnana. But those who desire bhakti, they exclusively instruct on the difference. So this is why sometimes you see some verses kind of combine them, sometimes they kind of differentiate them. The reason is because of that. Especially when you want to propagate bhakti, then the acharyas, they tend to kind of break it down. They kind of try to make a difference, a very, very strong difference. That is why in the translation, Prabhupada also, he says, ādhyātmikaḥ means the relation to the living entity and the Lord. You see, I mean, he's trying to break it down. He's not trying to combine them. This is the reason why the acharyas do that. And it is very common. That is why, in the 11th canto also in the Bhagavad-gītā, Kṛṣṇa says the same thing. See, sometimes if you try to count, okay, now Paramatma is there, Jivatma is there. Are these two tattvas? Are they one tattva? I mean, what is it like, If you try to understand Bhagavad-gītā and Bhagavatam, even the number of tattvas keeps changing. Like in the Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 26th chapter, and actually this next chapter, there the Lord Kapila talks about 27 tattvas. That is because he also adds time as one tattva and also adds Jivatma and Paramatma as separate tattvas. So he has 27 tattvas. But in the Bhagavad-gītā 13th chapter, you only see 26 tattvas. But again in the 11th chapter, 11th canto, you'll see 28 tattvas. So the reason why all these things is changing is because, as Kṛṣṇa says in the 11th canto, the number of tattvas is calculated according to the intention of the speaker. If the speaker is more focusing on the Jnana Tattva, he kind of tries to combine things. When he is focusing more on Bhakti, he tries to break it apart things. So this is very common. So this is why we, just to summarize, this is how, the acharyas are very specific on using the word Paramatma and Bhagavan, and how, based upon the intent of the speaker and what he wants to propagate, either Bhakti or Jnana, there could be some differences like in this way, and how the different acharyas kind of interpret the same sloka in different ways. And now coming back, the other topic which is mentioned in this translation is about the living entity. How the living entity is in constant, suffering, either it be happiness or distress, as long as it is material. So to really understand why the living entity is suffering, if we go back to a proper understanding of the Jiva Tattva, as given by Jiva Goswami in his Paramatma Sandarbha, basically, to start off with, there are actually 21 intrinsic qualities of the living entities. Of course, these 21 intrinsic qualities, where he elaborately describes about the uniqueness of a living entity, which is actually taken by the work of Jamatar Muni. Actually, he was one of the acharyas of Ramanacharya. And he actually gets the same thing from Padma Purana. And Jiva Goswami actually refers to that work when he's trying to explain Jiva Tattva, which lays as a foundation for the Jiva Tattva understanding on the Gaudiya Vaishnavism, right? Out of that 21 qualities, the 12th quality of the soul is of the nature of consciousness and bliss, Chid Anandatmaka. So that is actually one of the intrinsic characteristics of a soul to actually to seek after pleasure and bliss. and of course, there are so many other references to this, the characteristics of a soul to be, seeking for the pleasure. For example, in the, also in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, also there is a mention of the pastime of the sage Yajnavalkya and his wife Maitreyi. The sage Yajnavalkya, basically, he has 2 wives. So towards the end of when he's old, basically, he also wants to retire like Kadam Muni, he wants to retire and he wants to kind of like, give away his wealth. And he kind of gives his wealth 50% to first wife, 50% to second wife. But, and the second wife is very happy, but the first wife is still not happy. She's thinking that this Yajnavalkya is very easily giving away all his wealth. That means that he should have something more valuable than simply this wealth. Then the Maitreyi is the first wife. And Maitreyi goes and tells to her husband, see, I think that you have something more valuable than this wealth. That is why you are so easily giving it away. Tell me, what is that some wealth which you are holding off from me? And very pleased by, by this inquiry of Maitreyi, then Yajnavalkya, there's a long conversation. And in one of the conversation, he says that, Atmamshu kamaya patihi priyo bhavati. Where he says that, see, when a wife is loving the husband, it is not for the sake of husband the wife is loving. It is basically the wife is loving for her own self, right? So that is why when that love is broken, she will go and marry somebody else, right? So it is her own pleasure. It is for oneself that anybody is actually loving anybody. It is selfish at the end of the day. That is why it says, kamaya pati priyo bhavati. That is because of the intrinsic characteristics of the soul to seek after bliss. And of course, Jiva Goswami takes these different characteristics and he tries to find similar verses in Bhagavatam to kind of further collaborate these ideologies. So there, actually, he refers to the 10th canto, 14th chapter, verse number 54, which is actually of a similar understanding. So this verse is actually a prayers by Lord Brahma to Kṛṣṇa, where Lord Brahma says, Tasmat Priyatamah Swatma, means the translation of this Bhagavatam shloka goes on as, therefore, it is his own self that is most dear to everyone embodied living entity. And it is simply for the satisfaction of this self, right? And the whole world material creation of moving and non-moving entities exists. You see, Atmaya means it is for one own self. So in this way, because of the intrinsic nature of the soul to be seeking after the bliss, right? But this bliss can actually be of different types. One type of bliss is called as Mrityananda, means material happiness. And the other type of happiness is Jivananda, means it is also material, but this is not in the mode of passion, but it is more of in the mode of like ignorance, like when you really sleep, like you're having a good sleep, like you're happy, right? So that is also one kind of happiness, right? But above that is actually Brahmananda, which is experience of Brahman, and next is Bhaktiyananda, which is the highest happiness, which is actually the happiness of the loving service to the Lord and the devotees. So now, depending upon the degree of the advancement of this person, of this living entity and his consciousness, right, he can seek out to this different types of pleasures which is available to him, and the highest pleasure is Bhaktiyananda. And that is where there is no more frustration. As long as you are in the material, seeking the material pleasure, as Prabhupada mentioned in this purport, the happiness and distress always next to each other. You cannot really get rid of the other things. So unless you reach to the level of the highest pleasure, there is no question of the ultimate benefit. So in this way, the personality of Godhead, Kapila, has summarized that now I'm going to explain that yoga system which is related to the Lord and the super soul in your heart, and that will give the ultimate benefit and the ultimate happiness, and that I will do through the detachment from this material world. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Yeah. Yes, Rameshwar Prabhu can go ahead.
Could you go back to the original Bhagavatam text for today? Thank you. Hare Krishna. So, in this translation, this is the first statement by the Supreme Lord in answering the questions of the Devahuti. And he's saying that that yoga system, which is meant for the ultimate benefit of the living being, will cause detachment from all happiness and distress in this material world. So, in relating to people, and preaching to people, and teaching people Krishna consciousness, I don't think it's difficult to explain that here's a system that will enable you to rise above any distress. They love that idea.
Yeah.
But the idea that this is a system that's going to enable you to rise above all your happiness makes no sense intuitively to non-devotees. So how do you, just focusing on that, we know that happiness is desired. It's a natural condition to be happy. And while the living being's trying to be happy in the material world, we're teaching a yoga system, the Lord's teaching a yoga system that's going to let you be detached from being happy. That's the question that people may ask, like, why do I want this?
Yes. So actually,
give me anything that gets me rid of distress, but don't give me something that gets me rid of happiness.
Yeah. So I can tell you from one of my experience of actually talking to one yoga student. So I'm going to tell you my experience in talking to one yoga student. So this yoga student, she was attending these yoga classes, and of course, when by doing yoga, Ashtanga yoga, right, physical exercises, it gives you some happiness, right, because it kind of takes away your diseases, and there is some happiness in that. Now, but however, if you look at the yoga system, see this exercise is just a fraction, actually, a very small portion of the full yoga system, right? Now, my response to that person is that, see, if you are experiencing so much of pleasure and happiness just by doing a fraction of the actual yoga systems, can you imagine what the 99% is waiting for you? You see that thing? Why do you limit yourself only to that aspect of that system where it's only giving a fraction of the happiness, where I'm telling you this is just like a 0.1% of what I can actually offer you? Because see, even if you do yoga, that half an hour, 1 hour, whatever Kumi has for 1 hour session, it's not going to completely eliminate the disease. It may kind of control the disease, right? Even controlling the disease is giving you so much of happiness, then imagine how much happiness you would get, like, when you really experience the 99% which I have not taught you yet, right? So these are some of the ways, I talk to people and they kind of appreciated it, and,
It's not like we're telling people don't care about happiness.
Yes.
What we're telling them is that there is a vast, unlimited ocean of happiness that you have not tasted yet.
Yeah.
You're getting a tiny, reflection, almost superficial reflection, whatever happiness you're getting in this body. We're going to take you so far beyond that in terms of happiness. That's very positive.
Exactly.
Just telling people we're going to get you detached from happiness doesn't sound positive.
Yeah.
But talking about an unlimited ocean of bliss, that's very positive.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we first go to Devavrata Prabhu, if you don't mind, Prabhu? Devavrata Prabhu, and then we can go back to that Prabhu.
Yeah, in relationship to what Rameshwara Prabhu was saying, I was just thinking that in relationship to what Rameshwara Prabhu was saying, I was just thinking of that poem that Prabhupada would often quote from Vidyapati, where that it's not that there's no happiness in this world, but that happiness is like a tiny drop in a desert.
Yeah.
So it's actually not happiness at all. I just needed a little bit of clarification. You said that the Paramatma is not solidly explained. Did you mean that in relationship to the scholars of the Vedas, or do you mean that in society in general?
In general, let me tell you, I have spoken to so many, scholars and people, but I really haven't really met any person who can solidly understand or have a conception or explanation of difference between Bhagavan and Paramatma. a lot of times people kind of interchangeably use these words, but there's no real clarity. So that is, that is where, even before Jiva Goswami has written Paramatma Sundarbha, even within the Vedic tradition also, there is no like real solid understanding of difference of Paramatma and Bhagavan. Most of the time we kind of use it interchangeably. Yes. Yes, go ahead, bro.
With Paramatma, you were saying that in other, as I recall, you were saying in other faiths, they don't seem to touch upon Paramatma.
Yeah.
And the one thing I'm a little familiar with is Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And I was wondering what the Holy Ghost aspect of, I think, is Christianity or maybe Catholicism, I don't know. But I'm thinking that's the only reference to some witness.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I want to touch upon is that in the Prabhupada memory tapes that Siddhanta has produced, and I forget which devotee is referring to this, that Prabhupada asked a question, what is this human form of life meant for? Yeah, what is this human form of life meant for? And so devotees are giving different answers, but it's not the answer that Prabhupada wants to hear. And so finally he says, this human form of life is meant for enjoyment. So then you have to go further and think, what is that? What is that actual enjoyment? Prabhupada wanted, but the goal is to enjoy.
Yeah, that is true. So that is exactly similar to this Brihadaranyaka Upanishad verse, which basically says that Atma Kamaya. Atma Kamaya basically doesn't mean that even after you realize, doesn't mean that you'll come out of this Atma Kamaya. You're still Atma Kamaya, but there Atma, it's not body. Atma means soul, because Atma can have different meanings depending upon the advancement of the consciousness a person is. So this Atma Kamaya is always applicable throughout, because that's an intrinsic nature of a soul to seek out bliss.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for a great class. Can you go back to the translation of the original verse?
Oh, okay, sure.
So I was learning about the Sanskrit, please.
Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. This
The kleshas.
Yeah, the kleshas, pancha kleshas.
Kleshas, obstacles caused by Mother Nature, by other living entities, and by one's own body and mind.
Yes, so you have ādhyātmikaḥ, ādhi-daivika, ādhi-bhautika, right?
Yes,
so
but
this
now it's
sound
being
is
described
similar,
as a
right?
soul. So.
Yeah. So it is similar. ādhyātmikaḥ, ādhi-daivika, ādhi-bhautika. So ādhyātmika is essentially referring to a soul, right? That's a general meaning could be. But in this specific context, it's kind of yoga ādhyātmika, means yoga related to the soul. Like, it's soul, but it's kind of, because, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I have a comment and a question. So, in the 11th canto of śrī-bhagavān, chapter 14, a conversation between Uddhava and Kṛṣṇa. Uddhava is asking Kṛṣṇa if there's any process that is higher. There are many sages and many philosophical people who explain this in relation to happiness. And then Lord Kṛṣṇa, from verse 1 to all the way to 26, explains what is the highest. In other words, everybody's trying to find happiness in different levels, and money and wealth and yoga and so on and on and on and on. Now my question, that comment is for someone who, that comment that I said, if someone wants to know more in detail, what Kṛṣṇa says is there, 11th chapter, 11th canto, chapter 14, all the way from 1 to 26. My question now is, in the last part of your presentation, if a person asks, why is it that, we care for our wife, our children's family members, and we love them, but when it comes to actually who you love the most is yourself, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Yeah. So the question is, why is it? I found out that in the 10th canto, but I want to hear your explanation. Why is it that yourself becomes the most dear?
That is because you have Lord in your heart.
Correctly.
Yes. You love yourself because you have Lord in your heart.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Niranta Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai.